What's going on, UFC fans? In today's episode, we're going to break down all 12 divisions in the UFC from the women's and the men's, and we're going to rank them 1 through 10, and we're going to find out what division is the best division in the history of the UFC. All right, everybody, we're back. My criteria for ranking the best divisions in UFC history comes from pay-per-view buys, depth of the division throughout the entirety of the UFC, and also the impact that division had on the sport and the popularity of the UFC. All right, everybody, there were two divisions that did not make my top 10 cut. And I think everyone would agree that the first division is, without a doubt, women's 145 pounds. The history of this division is not very long. The depth of the roster at 145 is by far the worst in the UFC. Amanda Nunes retired as the champion at 145, but she never really had that great competitor to challenge her at 145, and everyone she fought at 145, she pretty much just destroyed. So the first one to go is women's 145. Adios, amiga. The next divisions that were up for getting the boot from making my top 10 list were men's 125 and women's 115. So I went back and forth, and if you take a look at the history of the women's strawweight, we got Joanna, we got Carla Esparza, Rose Namajunas. Some of their fights were absolutely incredible. I mean, these fights are amazing. And then we had Michelle Waterson, Tecia Torres. These are some of the most and luckily, lately, Weili Zhang has popped up. Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And if you look at the Jessica Andrade, I mean, this division is a lot of fun to watch. So it was really hard choosing between them and then the men's 125 division. I was going back and forth, back and forth. We got Demetrius Johnson, Henry Cejudo, and more recently, we've had the wars between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno. It was really hard for me to choose, but I had to go with the men's 125 division to make my top 10 barely, just because of Demetrius Johnson. Demetrius Johnson is probably in my top 5 all-time UFC fighters. He was just so much better than everyone else in his division, and it's really hard to differentiate him from the rest of the pack because he was so much better than them. I wish Demetrius Johnson had moved up to 135 so he could really test himself, but having one of the top 5 fighters of all time in that division and the recent success of Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno saved the division to make my top 10. And women's 115 strawweight had to get the boot. I love that division, but the depth is really what helped them not make the list. Besides maybe 5 or 6 fighters at 115 that I love to watch fight, that put on exciting fights, but it's a relatively new division in the UFC, and they just don't quite have enough to make my top 10. Coming in at number 9 is women's 125. It was a toss-up between men's and women's 125. I like the men's 125, but especially recently, they're only fighting each other. At least Valentina Shevchenko, she's not the champion anymore because she recently lost to Alexa Grasso, and that rematch is coming up. But if you look at Valentina Shevchenko, the history of her, she's fought so many different people, man. Look at all these people she's just mowed through over the years. It's barely any repeats. And I think, especially recently, the men's 125-pound division with Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno just fighting each other over and over and over again, it just got a little boring for me. I don't think anyone has really wanted to tune into the 125 division in quite some time, but I think everyone, especially over the last 5 years, whenever Valentina Shevchenko fights, they are 100% tuning in to watch her kick the shit out of the next challenger at 125. Even like in the Grasso fight, she was beating the brakes off of her the entire fight. She went for that, I think it was a spinning back elbow or something like that, got caught, taken down, and then choked out. So I think she's going to win the rematch pretty easily, just like Nunes did against Pena. But I'm going to go with women's 125 coming in at number 9. Coming in at number 8 on our list of top UFC divisions, might surprise a lot of especially new UFC viewers, it's men's 135 pounds. I love this division. Dominic Cruz was the king of this division for a long time, and then Cody Garbrandt took that away from him, and then Cody Garbrandt, as you can see, has kind of whoop. So why I chose to put 135, the men's bantamweight division, at number 8 is because they never really had a superstar that broke through to the mainstream that really put eyes on the UFC. And prior to the last couple years, 135 was not a division that fans were clamoring to watch. Now it's a totally different story. 135 is super exciting. I love Aljo, Peter Yan. We got Sean O'Malley. We got Corey Sandhagen. I mean, this division is super exciting. We'll see how it plays out in the long term, but they never had a George St. Pierre, John Jones, Anderson Silva. So that's why I had to put them at number 8 on my list. Next, this is where it really starts to get tough. But I'm going to do a surprise pick for number 7, and that's going to be men's heavyweight. Heavyweight is notoriously been one of the weaker divisions in the UFC competition-wise. I mean, we've had a few guys kind of break through, like Stipe as of late. But even before, like Brock Lesnar and Randy Couture, I mean, these guys were popular, but the competition level for me was just not there. I love Stipe, and when he lost to Francis Ngannou, I thought Francis was going to like take the baton into the next stratosphere for the heavyweight division because everyone likes to watch heavyweights. But for me, besides the champions, the rest of the division was just ridiculously mediocre. I mean, when Stipe was champion, let's take a look at the history of the heavyweight division. These are the all-time rankings. Fedor never fought in the UFC. And here are some of the other guys. We got Cain Velasquez, Fabricio Verdum, Junior Dos Santos. A lot of these guys' runs was, not long. And after the top, Daniel Cormier was mainly at 205 for the majority of his career. And then we got Arlovsky, Overeem. I mean, this division, Brock Lesnar had a really short run, in the UFC. And a lot of these heavyweights went on to fight in Bellator. I don't know, the heavyweight division for me, it's not the heavyweight division in boxing. They had a few big pay-per-views, but for the most part, besides, the top 3 in the division, I mean, the rest of the division, especially the top 10 and top 15, when you got down to the top 10 in heavyweight, I mean, their skill set was super limited, terrible cardio, horrible wrestling. I just don't think that heavyweight deserves really a top 5 ranking overall. These divisions, it gets tougher and tougher the closer we get to number 1, but I do think that bantamweight at 135 and heavyweight at number 7 fits just right. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of my first couple picks, and then we're about to enter the top 5 really soon, so hang on. Coming in at number 6 on our list is men's 170 pounds. If you take George St. Pierre out of the list, the 170-pound division is one of the weaker divisions in the UFC if you look at it from a historical perspective. And the only reason why they made it as high as number 6 on my list is because they have perhaps the greatest UFC fighter of all time in George St. Pierre. And he was able to get the UFC to the next level. He was like the Conor McGregor before Conor McGregor just, shot the lid off of this thing. George St. Pierre and his karate style was incredible to watch. He was super exciting, and he's a great character in the history of the UFC. I love GSP. Anyone that loves the UFC loves GSP. But if you look at this division without him, and even Kamaru Usman is a great fighter. Nobody can debate that. But he was never like what I would call a superstar. I don't think people are tuning in to buy Kamaru Usman's pay-per-views like they did, like a Conor McGregor or an Israel Adesanya or John Jones. He just never got to that superstar level. And minus George St. Pierre and Kamaru Usman, this division leaves a lot to be desired. Even for me, putting them at number 6, maybe I should have put them below heavyweight. I don't know. But George St. Pierre did so much for the sport, and he was the pay-per-view king at one time. That's why he landed at number 6 on my list. But the rest of this division, they did have BJ Penn, who was really popular and a great fighter. But he's not in that superstar stratosphere where like people on the street know who BJ Penn is. But Matt Serra, Stephen Thompson, Rory McDonald, Colby Covington, Leon Edwards, these are all great fighters, but they're not superstars. They didn't change the sport. They didn't necessarily push the sport forward, and that's why 170 pounds comes at number 6 on my list. All right, UFC fans, you made it to my top 5 of the greatest divisions in UFC history. Coming in at number 5 is men's 205 pounds. And coming in at number 4 is men's 185 pounds. I went back and forth between 205 and 185 and which one I thought was better. Everyone knows that John Jones is probably the greatest fighter in UFC history. But if you look at the division that he conquered, there's not a lot of guys that made it into superstar status besides Chuck Liddell. But Chuck Liddell had that horrible end to his career where he was getting knocked out by everyone and their mother's uncle's goldfish. So that division leaves a little bit to be desired. Without John Jones, they probably would have been like 7 or 8. But since he's such a great fighter and there were so many eyes on the sport because of John Jones, they come in at number 5. And the reason they didn't come in at number 4 is from the depth of the division. I just don't think there's John Jones, Chuck Liddell, Daniel Cormier. And other than that, it's not, murderer's row. A lot of really good fighters, don't get me wrong. But are they how many superstars came out of this 205-pound division? 1.5, I would say. DC is a great fighter, but he didn't become champion until John Jones was out at 205, and then he went on to heavyweight to win another championship. So DC's kind of heavyweight and 205, even though he spent the majority of his career at 205. And then we have number 4, 185 pounds. So I liked the depth of 185 middleweight a little bit more than I did 205. You got Anderson Silva. If he didn't have the PEDs hovering over his head, he'd be a top 5 fighter for sure. And he was must-see TV for years and years and years. And now we have Israel Adesanya, another absolute superstar. Him losing to Alex Pereira and coming back and knocking him out put him into another level of superstardom. He is must-see TV. And to have 2 guys that really broke through into superstardom is why they come in at number 4 on my list. I also love guys like Michael Bisping and Luke Rockhold, and Robert Whittaker is an amazing fighter. And Chael Sonnen is kind of mixed in there a little bit. I love 185, and they just miss making it into my top 3. All right, guys, we're there. The top 3 greatest division in UFC history. Hang on, and we'll see who's going to be number 1 for the greatest division in UFC history. Coming in at number 3 on our rankings for the greatest divisions in UFC history is none other than women's bantamweight, the 135-pound division. When Ronda Rousey came on the scene, and started kicking the living dog shit out of every woman on the planet. It completely changed women's MMA forever. Until she met up with Amanda Nunes, the greatest women fighter of all time. She took that torch and ran with it and became the greatest of all time. But the amount of eyes on Ronda Rousey when she made that rise to fame was absolutely incredible. She not only changed women's MMA forever, but she changed the UFC for all time. She was absolutely must-see TV. Those arm bars and those punches, Ronda was absolutely incredible. And Amanda Nunes taking that torch and becoming the best female fighter on the planet was so much fun to watch. This division is incredible. I can't even begin to tell you how much Ronda Rousey changed the game of mixed martial arts. She is an extraordinary talent and an even a bigger personality. She's moved on to WWE and done so much with her career. There are so many women that are starting MMA because of Ronda Rousey, and her and Amanda Nunes are icons in the UFC. All right, now we're going to move on to the top two. We're going to go 145 at number 2 and men's 155 at number 1. 145 comes in at number 2 on our list because Conor McGregor broke in at 145 and changed the UFC and MMA landscape forever. He is, without a doubt, the most iconic fighter in UFC history. And look, McGregor Khabib, McGregor Poirier, McGregor Diaz, McGregor Poirier, McGregor Cerrone, McGregor Diaz. He is absolute box office. I mean, Conor McGregor has changed the world of MMA for eternity. He got them on the main stage, and with Conor McGregor's stardom, the UFC was able to surpass boxing as the greatest combat sport on planet Earth. The reason why I decided to put 145 at number 2 and 155 at number 1 is because Conor McGregor moved up to 155 and became the double champ, and then he fought Khabib, probably the greatest fighter in UFC history. No losses. The amount of domination he had was like no one else. John Jones, who a lot of people say is the best, had PED knocks against him, and he also had a lot of really close fights. That Dominic Reyes fight, I thought he lost, and there were a couple other decisions in his career where people thought he may have came on the short end of the stick in those fights. So I have 155 at number 1 and 145 at number 2. And another reason why 155 became my number 1 spot is because that division is far and away the most deep division in the UFC, and it's been like that for as long as I can remember. I mean, the top 10, 12 guys in that division could all be champions on any given day. Like Paul Felder, I think, was ranked number 9 or 10. He beat Charles Oliveira on that day. So, I mean, these guys are very interchangeable, and this guy could beat that guy on this day, and this guy could beat that guy. It's like that division is the most competitive. The top 8, 9, 10 guys in that division, I think, all had the potential to be champions at some point in their careers. So there it is, everybody. Our top 10 divisions in UFC history. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below your top 10 rankings of these divisions. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video, and we'll catch you guys on the next fight. Peace.